We convene the Committee of the Whole of City Council on April 11th and ask for a roll call, please.
Fanouken,
Here.
Markwart,
Here.
Snow,
Here.
Noriko,
Here.
Baker, Favor,
Here.
Ray,
Here?
6-0.
Okay. We do have before us this evening policy discussion regarding updates to city liquor code. I'll turn to City Attorney Frieders.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a continuation of the discussion that the council had started at a recent meeting. As per direction of the council at that meeting, we've taken a couple issues at a time. We'll be returning over the next several meetings with these. And it's being presented again for discussion on the COW. And then we do have action items on the council agenda as per the direction of the council if you should choose to proceed forward with these changes. The three that are contemplated tonight, first would be a change in the scope of our hotel licenses, which would be comparable to the recent change in the Illinois State Liquor Code for hotel licenses. Essentially what it indicates is that where there's a hotel under common ownership and management, all of their liquor-related operations, whether it be room service or mini bars or hospitality operations or even the conduct of an on-site restaurant or bar, if it's all commonly owned and operated by one management, it can all be conducted under one liquor license. If the on-site restaurant or on-site bar or different aspects of their operation are under separate ownership or separate management, there'd be a different license for each separately owned entity. So that again is presented to you tonight as an action item on the agenda. Second is with regard to BYOB licensure. The city had received requests from local restaurant licensees asking if there would be the ability to offer BYOB service at their establishments. So we have a BYOB classification for establishments that just want to have bring your own bottle service. These would be existing restaurants that are licensed that also, for whatever business reason, wish to potentially permit customers to bring in their own alcohol for BYOB service with a corking charge. We don't have any reason not to allow this that we've been able to devise. And so to be responsive to the request from the business community, we are recommending making that change. Then third would be a question regarding the low alcohol by volume restaurant licensure and the real food requirement. Currently under city code, our city code indicates that when you have any kind of restaurant, whether it's full service or just low alcohol by volume, that if you're going to have a sale of alcoholic beverages, you have to have a corresponding sale of real food. So you would go in and purchase a meal, not just go in and purchase an alcoholic beverage. And real food is defined in the code as essentially meals. It excludes things like just chips or pretzels. We've had a request from some of our low alcohol by volume restaurants to ask whether the city would consider changing that requirement so that they could permit customers to come in and have a glass of wine as a standalone item, for example. We've reviewed that internally, and from a enforcement perspective, there are sometimes challenges with practically enforcing the real food requirement, and also when a customer comes in and has a meal and may stay for a number of hours, at what point in time are the beverages relating to the meal or not. With regard to the low alcohol by volume establishments that we have in the community, the risk of pursuing this change is perceived to be relatively low. So while we're not recommending the change for all restaurant licensees, we have prepared it as an ordinance for the council to consider if you wish to allow it for, again, just the low alcohol by volume. So predominantly establishments that are beer and wine type establishments. At the council's request, we did look at other comparable college communities across the state to evaluate what their practices were. There is no clear trend. There are communities that fall on both sides of the equation, but a majority of the comparable university communities do not require a real food purchase with an alcoholic beverage at a low alcohol by volume restaurant. So we do have the details on Carbondale, Macomb, Edwardsville, Champaign, Urbana, Bloomington, and Normal in the backup. And as we continue to bring forward other similar policy questions, we're going to look at those same university communities for information on how they approach other topics. I'm happy to answer any questions the council may have, but at this point we've prepared an ordinance that's in the council agenda that would contemplate first, one, making the change with regard to hotel licensure. A second, that would expand restaurant licenses to have the ability to apply for a supplemental BYOB license. And third, a provision that would change our licensure for low alcohol by volume restaurants, eliminating the real food requirements. And I'm happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Questions of Dean, Alderman Snow?
First on the first one, the hotel license, I have no issue with that. Everybody I've talked to says that seems to make sense. On the BYOB license, I'm trying to figure out what reason a restaurant that already serves alcohol would want to allow people to bring in a beverage. To me, it seems to reduce the sales, their sales and their profit, and I haven't really figured out why they would want to even permit that.
It's an excellent question, and I'm sure that they charge a corking fee associated with the activity, as they're permitted to under the code and under state law. I can't really offer an explanation for the economic basis behind it, beyond saying that we've had businesses that have asked us for that authorization, and we do allow it for some types of licenses, and we couldn't really come up with a reason. If they're already going to be authorized and legally permitted to sell alcohol directly and dispense it themselves, we couldn't come up with really any downside from a regulatory perspective. I'm not permitting them to do so if the customer's brought in the alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, I suppose their insurance would still cover it, their dram shop insurance or whatever. I think that would be a concern that it adequately covered. All right, so that's still kind of up in the air with me. As far as the real food requirement, I mean, I on one level, I think it'd be all right, but I guess I don't want these kind of establishments to become a place where you can hang out for a few hours just having beer or wine. I'm wondering if there could be maybe a restriction on how many drinks, maybe a couple, 2 drinks per person or something. I don't know if that would occur, but I'd hate to see a restaurant turn into a night spot where people go for 4 or 5 hours just to drink alcohol. And I realize the restaurant food would have to be open at that point, but I don't know if we've had any, if potentially there'd be any issues with that or not, but that's sort of the question in my mind. I don't know what anybody else thinks about that.
In looking at the comparable communities, we weren't able to identify any that implemented other restrictions, those that permitted the sale of alcohol without the corresponding sale of real food. The imposition of, at a city level, of a drink limit would be something that likely would be somewhat challenging to enforce on a practical
Yeah.
basis, but we could
Probably
certainly.
no more than the food requirement. I mean, I think you'd probably only enforce it when it gets abused, and then you start enforcing it.
I would offer corroboration of city attorney's representation that a restaurant owner approached me with the situation where, not at his encouragement, but customers brought in their own bottle, and he realized under his restaurant license, he was prohibited from serving from their bottle.
So it might have been a specialty bottle if they wanted to.
That's correct.
use to
It was,
celebrate some special occasion or something.
yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure it would be at the proprietor's encouragement, but if they were presented with the situation under the current ordinance, they're restricted from serving that bottle or contents. Other questions or discussion? Alderman Faber.
Do we currently have BYOB licensees?
Yes, we do.
Okay. That was the first question I had. Another question I had is the low alcohol by volume. It's difficult now to enforce the real food, and you have noted in here that it would be potentially difficult to monitor the under 21 situation as well, like potentially under 21 drinking in these establishments as well. Sorry, I'm not being real clear. So I'm trying to weigh which is it better to have the real food, which is difficult to enforce, or is it the protection of, those under 21 who might be potentially drinking or at least exposed to potentially more people drinking at that type of a facility or a restaurant.
Yeah, so in the background memo, we did try and identify the pros and cons of each of these different regulatory changes. As I said, there are some practical challenges with enforcement, but we also felt it necessary to note that, as you've stated, eliminating the real food requirement in some ways blurs the distinction between a restaurant and a bar, other than the low alcohol by volume requirement. That said, the city is vigilant about enforcing the 21 and older age restrictions, and that would remain our expectation regardless of whether a corresponding food requirement exists or not. And establishments, it would be incumbent upon them to continue to vigorously card people that are buying alcohol and continue to monitor the consumption of it. And if somebody sits down at a table and buys food and has an alcoholic beverage, they could just as easily pass that alcoholic beverage to someone under 21 as if they don't have food. But it certainly is an important policy question for the council to consider.
And one other question, is the BYOB licensees, are they kind of held to the exact same standard as terms of training and those requirements that low alcohol by volume or even just a normal alcohol licensee would be subjected to?
Yes, so we're not proposing any changes in the standalone BYOB license at this point, and those licensees are required to have, to go through our training program, and to have Bassett or TIP certified trainers and servers on staff, to have an identified manager that's gone through the criminal background process, the ownership having gone through that same process. So they are held to the same rigors, and they're also held to the same requirements with regard to service of alcohol, that they have to, again, card people, not serve to minors, control the consumption, maintain appropriate insurance on the premises.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions or discussion? Alderman Markle.
As far as with the real food, with the third part, with the restaurant and low ABV license, part of where I kind of come into an issue with is, for instance, is sitting out Eduardo's at their outside spot. Okay, so as I go down there this summer, I have to order food to sit out there, right? And drink, because they're a restaurant.
I'm not entirely certain off the top of my head. I believe they have a combination restaurant and bar license.
And bar license?
That allows the western portion of the premises to be used just for bar
Okay.
purposes.
So let's go to Rosita's then. I like them both. They have specials on different Tuesdays and Thursdays, but anyways. So Rosita's. So I go to sit on the patio at Rosita's, I have to order food. Then they would not be allowed to, so are we being a little, iffy? What's not to say that they want to say, yeah, why do we have to serve food? Why can't we apply for this other? It seems like we're allowing somebody else to do something that the other restaurants aren't allowed to do.
I think from as far as the distinction between the low alcohol by volume restaurants and the full service alcohol restaurants, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this, but the rate at which bad behavior escalates or can escalate when you're consuming, full alcohol content beverages, there's a significantly greater threat and a kind of a disproportionate threat from that in comparison to consuming beer or wine when it's being served to you by a server at an establishment, and they're able to track, the individual number of beers or glasses of wine that you're drinking. So I think from a staff perspective, we were comfortable with the low alcohol by volume licensure. I don't think we would make that same recommendation relative to full-service restaurants. We haven't had a request for full-service restaurants, and I'd certainly want to go back and talk with our public safety departments about that. But I think just thinking about that conceptually, there's a pretty big distinction in the types of alcohol that's being served at the different establishments and the potential for adverse consequences to arise.
Alderman Fanouken.
Dean, in the backup, you provide that the three of the other comparable cities require a certain percentage of sales to be of foodstuffs. I think Macomb, Urbana, and Bloomington. Is that, so, I mean, is that something that we do now, or is it something that we would look to do as part of this process?
The City of DeKalb's liquor code up until 2012 had a process in it where it said licensees were supposed to have up to a certain percentage or a cap of their sales be from alcohol. And what we found was that the city had never actually enforced that. It didn't have any mechanism to enforce it. In looking at those comparable communities, some of them have that kind of blanket statement where there's a limit in place, but they don't really practically enforce it. Others have an actual requirement that on an annual basis, you have to submit an audit showing your total food sales completed by a third party, your total alcohol sales, and certify those results back to the community so that it can be reviewed and approved that you're acting within those parameters. When the liquor code was updated in 2012, that was one of the items that was discussed with the business community, and there was a significant negative reaction, at least at that time, to the concept of requiring an annual audit to be submitted to the city that would delineate between food and beverage sales. So in lieu of that, the real food requirement and not imposing the percentage sale restrictions was what was pursued by the council at that time. And again, as we've looked at this in retrospect and looked at the requests from businesses, the fundamental concern is more oriented towards full-service alcohol than low alcohol by volume, which is why we felt comfortable bringing this forward and presenting it to council for consideration.
Thank you.
Other thoughts or discussion? As Dean indicated, we'll be coming back to these three items as action items on our regular agenda. So at this point, I would just ask if there are further thoughts or questions that you have at this point. If not, we'll move on, and as I say, we'll come back to these in first reading in our regular agenda this evening. Seeing no further questions, I will ask for a motion to recess to executive session.
Mr. Mayor, public participation.
Public participation?
Yes. Is there anyone wishing to speak before council this evening at this point? Seeing none, I'll move to executive session, or ask for a motion to approve an executive session to discuss personnel as provided for in 5 ILCS 120/2C1, to discuss collective bargaining as provided for in 5 ILCS 120/2C2, and to discuss acquisition of property as provided for in 5 ILCS 120/2C5. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Noriko and seconded by Alderman Jacobson. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Okay, we'll move to the executive conference room.
Mayor?
Yes. Sure. Roll call, please.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Fanouken?
Yes.
Markwart?
Yes.
Snow?
Yes.
Noriko?
Yes.
Baker? Favor?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes,
7-0.
thank you. Okay.